Hello everyone, welcome to Radical Self-Respect. As you can see, I have a guest. He's a sergeant first class and a former law enforcement officer, lieutenant by the name of Rick Lynch. Thank you for coming on here today, sir.
Pleasure to meet you, Jared.
So before we get into today, I think it'd be interesting to even share how I even got involved in your life here too. So I was working for a senatorial candidate in Pennsylvania, Carla Sands. And it's one of my favorite jobs to do. You talk to people at the door, you ask them questions about politics. And this is Pennsylvania, of course. And that's how I met Mr. Lynch here. And we had an interesting discussion at the door. We talked about a whole plethora of topics, talked a lot about the public intellectuals that I know, Sam Harris and some of the other ones you mentioned to me.
Right.
But do you remember much of that conversation now?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, it was a broad conversation. I think we started talking about a whole plethora of subjects, and I think we found some connections.
Right.
I've always been concerned about the mental health delivery system, as you are. I've obviously been on your YouTube site and commented on some of the things, and you cover a broad spectrum of subject matter, which I think is important.
To say the least.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to be, I think you mentioned in our conversation off camera, if you're going to be a good citizen, you're going to educate yourself on some of these issues that are so pressing. And one of those is I think the failure of the mental health delivery system in this country.
Right.
And, you mentioned that I was a law enforcement officer, and you were correct. I was a lieutenant in the state of California, worked for a law enforcement agency there. And it used to be, when I first started my career, we had a place to take people that we thought were covered under the Health and Safety Code 11550 in California. That means you have somebody who may be in temporary or permanent mental distress. And we had a place to take them. It could be Patton Hospital in Southern California, which is a mental health hospital, or Atascadero, and we had places. They started defunding those in the 80s and 90s, and there were limited places.
That was under the Reagan stuff, right?
Yeah, it was. And, that's probably why I'm a political independent.
Right.
Because I'm loyal to the Constitution, not to any one party.
So this is a good thing to touch on here.
Yeah.
So what was the mental health system like before that happened? And then now, since that policy of the 80s, what is it like now? And what kind of things do you think they really need to improve upon?
Yeah, well, the first thing Congress can do is, and that's where we really need to go for this, is to fund better regional mental health delivery places.
Right.
Places where someone can go when they're in distress. Lancaster County, which is where we're sitting right now, beautiful Lancaster County, is starting to do some of that. We have a new mental health facility, and it is going to provide great help to many people. I couldn't give you the mechanics behind it and how it started, but I know there was kind of a swell of support for something like that. And now that we have it, I think people are really going to be benefit. And maybe that's where it needs to be done, at the local level. There needs to be, whether it's non-governmental organizations or civilian citizen groups, to really bring this to the forefront. Because I think a lot of the violence you're seeing today is perpetrated by people who are suffering from mental health issues.
Absolutely.
I know we have a current issue, and I know it's still sensitive, and Lord knows I have my own daughter who was little at one time, but the Uvalde situation is just reflective. What would make an 18-year-old go in and do that?
Many reasons, I would say, right?
Right.
And that's the thing, there's not just one issue at hand here. It's not just guns, but it's also guns, mental health, bullying, a bad family upbringing, perhaps. There's many contributing factors.
Yes.
And I think one of the issues that we see on the political level is people only want it solved one way. Like one side wants it solved, it just needs to be this. It needs to be gun control or nothing else matters. And Chuck Schumer, I know he did block something the other day. Yeah. He blocked something the Parkland families of the survivors, victims' families, I guess it was. They wanted this legislation passed that would protect the schools more. Chuck Schumer says, no, we don't want more guns in the schools, so we're not going to pass this legislation that, the victims' families wanted passed. But it just goes to show you, to me, they only want it solved one way.
Right.
But how do you even begin? Because this problem, they'll say this doesn't happen in Europe, right? They'll say more gun control in Europe. It doesn't happen in Europe.
Right.
But then they'll leave out the other part. The other part is, well, there's certainly more like knife stuff going on there. There's certainly more vehicular homicides there. And I know, for example, there's been assault attacks in Germany on a New Year's.
Yeah.
Maybe that doesn't happen as much if there's going to be more people armed. I don't know. The point is, though, that there's so many things contributing. I wouldn't mind seeing it harder for an 18-year-old to get a gun. I'm not against certain kinds of red flag laws. Maybe 18 to 21, maybe that is a good thing in some cases.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think there's, and we don't even have to go outside the country. You don't see, and we could talk about this, some of the places with the strongest gun laws have the most violent crimes using guns. Chicago,
Yes.
New York. I mean, they have very strict gun laws. And they will say, well, the guns are coming from here or coming from there. They're also coming across the border, back and forth. And if we're not willing to do something about securing the border, I want people to come here to work. I want them to come here legally. Why can't we get something together where we can control the border, control everything that comes back and forth, and yet allow for legal migration? Because I know people want to come here for opportunity, work, a better life. Some just want to come to work and go back home.
Right.
And so we need to look at all those things, but we can't get everybody on the same page.
Let's time out, rewind for one second here.
Yeah, I just want to go back to the weapon thing.
In particular, like Chicago and Phil,
Yeah.
other places
So
have strict gun laws. What happens
everybody
there?
owns a gun in Montana.
Right.
But you don't have this happening. And you can argue, well, population density, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I got it. But there's something. I was in law enforcement, and I've been in uniform for 4 decades. Now I'm a retired guy, so I can be somewhat philosophical. But I do bring a bit of experience. I trained on gun safety, was a firearm instructor myself. I don't see why, and now, even now, as a retired officer, if I carry a gun, my badge and my ID and my gun, I have to qualify once a year. Meanwhile, I had thousands of hours. The regular civilian is required nothing for gun safety. There is no mandate, and I don't want it to be a mandate. I want people to voluntarily do that. But why can't all these very powerful organizations, the government, the NRA, all of them work together for some common sense legislation? Common sense. And it just seems it's
That's a
political,
superpower nowadays.
and we're too close to another midterm election. And do you really think anything's going to get done? It's frustrating. It really is.
No, probably not. But is there anything that you see as like a bullseye? This is something they can do right now that would stop this. And like you said, the more legislation there is on guns, there's still going to be illegal guns.
Yes.
And I don't know what they do to stop that part.
Yes.
Because already all of these guns here. I know in places like Australia, they did like gun give-backs or buybacks or something.
They've done that here in this country as well. They did it in Chicago not too long ago. I don't know how successful it was. But there are so many guns in this country that I think even if you legislated hard line today, you would have guns in this country for 100 years. I mean, literally.
Most likely.
Yeah. I mean, so we have to allow the private citizen to own firearms in a responsible way, whether it's for hunting, home defense, or employment. Maybe you're a diamond courier and you need to carry a firearm, or whatever the case may be, that we can have some unified, and that's another thing, the state issue, because it varies from state to state. Like here in this jurisdiction, in Lancaster County, if you're a regular citizen, you go down, you fill out the forms, you show the appropriate identification, and they do a quick check on you. It takes about 10 minutes, if that long. And if you come back clear, you're issued a 5-year permit to carry a firearm. Is that okay? Yeah, you have no criminal record, but it doesn't address mental health. And that, if you notice, a lot of these shootings have been mental health related. A lot of the big shootings, if you want to call them that, the ones that affect, especially this Uvalde situation, or the one you mentioned, all these school shootings, or they're related to which a lot of people deny exists, gang violence.
Well, there's a lot of that too.
There's a lot of gang violence going on too in California. it has ebbed and flowed for 50 years.
But that's not necessarily part of the school shooting problem.
No, it's
that's just
not.
more of a period
It's
gun
not, but
violence
it's still,
and gang
there's
problem.
so many weapons out there that are not registered,
Yes.
right? So those are the ones we really need to address, not the ones that are registered to people who are law-abiding citizens.
Right.
So if you make this all-encompassing, massive legislation and don't consider all these aspects, then you're just going to be in trouble again.
So I seen Justin Trudeau. He said something about
Yeah.
they're going to be outlawing handguns there or
Yeah.
the sale. I didn't actually read into that and read the fine print. But
Right.
did you hear anything about that?
Yeah, I did. So, he is left wing. They have a different style of government, different powers. So that has to be something that the Canadians have to deal with. I know that they have increased sales. I think they sell something like 55,000 guns per year.
Right.
That's a pretty high amount. All of a sudden people want firearms. But anytime you start talking about firearms legislation, people who never wanted to own a gun before all of a sudden want to buy a gun.
Well, I mean, I don't blame them to a point. Right? It's an uncomfortable feeling if the only people who have guns will be the government, law enforcement, and then criminals.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know if that leaves a good.
Yeah, but my issue really lies with training and safety. And if you own a firearm and you're not pursuing either type of training, whether it be safety or marksmanship or anything like that, functionality of a firearm, then you're really messing
Well,
up.
this leads right into something too.
Sure.
I was pretty annoyed / disgusted at the Uvalde Police Department's response to that whole thing, where they were waiting outside for about a year. Now, as a former law enforcement officer, you might have a different perspective on this, but it was not very good optics, where parents were being prevented from going in. Some were in handcuffs, and then they released them. And then some even went in, I heard, and were able to pull out some kids.
Yeah.
And then I heard the police were telling people inside, say help if you need help. Someone screams they need help. The guy goes in and kills them.
Yeah.
So it's like there just seems to be, there's some disconnect there about what's going on in the whole situation.
Well, there very well could be some leadership culpability here. If you're the incident commander, that's a lot of weight on your shoulders. I've been an incident commander before, and I can tell you that the way that most law enforcement is trained in this country is that if it's an active shooter situation, you task organize the group of people, officers that you have, men and women, and you get them in a file, and you get them in there, and you take down the shooter. And I'm simplifying it. I may be giving you a reductionist view of it, but they are trained to do this. I think eventually the BORTAC group, the agents, the Border Patrol, which by the way makes this a federal case because this young man discharged his firearm at one of the BORTAC people, and they're federal officers, so this involves the federal government as well. I know Chief Arredondo has now allegedly stopped cooperating.
I heard that yesterday, yes.
With the Department of Public Safety, and so he'll have to answer for his actions. I'm sure he will have to reply in writing and maybe give verbal testimony. It needs to be looked at because clearly
something was going off there.
Something was going on. But that's another thing. People you mentioned earlier how we get compared to other countries. Well, when you have a national police force like they have, for example, I'll give you two examples. Israel, okay? They are all trained the same, okay? They're trained the same. They're in sync. Ireland, they have the Garda. The Garda, that's their police department. National police, they have the same training standards. When you go from, I don't know, I'll just pick some place out. For example, the California Highway Patrol, or you go to a small town in Ohio somewhere, they're not getting the same funding for